We are unpacking a really significant event that happened recently. Uh, Basically, a sophisticated, widespread Ukrainian drone attack targeting Russian air bases, the ones that house their strategic bombers.
It's a fascinating set of sources, yeah.
Uh,
Really highlights an unprecedented strike with some surprising details.
mhm.
So our mission here is to pull out the key insights from these documents, what happened, the
Mhm.
specific targets, the context around them, and what this whole event tells us about the state of play.
Exactly. It's not just about the attack itself, but the ripple effects and what it reveals. Get ready, because this deep dive is going to take us across vast distances and into some unexpected technical details. So let's start with the event itself. The sources describe this as a surprise drone attack that occurred on a Sunday. But this wasn't just a few drones hitting one spot. The scope was remarkable.
That's right. What really stands out in the sources is the sheer scale
Hmm.
and the sophistication. It's described as unprecedented, not only in its complexity, but critically in its reach. We're talking about drones hitting air bases as far away as Siberia. For the first time, that kind of distance was covered.
Siberia. Wow. That detail alone is pretty striking. Now, as with many events in this conflict, there are conflicting accounts of the outcome, right? Ukraine put out a claim that was quite dramatic, saying over 40 bombers, which they estimated is like a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, were damaged or destroyed.
And Russia countered by stating only several planes were struck, and they claimed the fires were, quickly extinguished.
And the sources are pretty clear that getting independent verification of these numbers is difficult, really difficult. While social media videos did surface, they seem to show maybe a smaller number of bombers appearing to be hit. Certainly didn't confirm that widespread damage Ukraine alleged.
But here's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because regardless of the exact battle damage assessment, whether it was, say, 2 planes or 40, what this attack unquestionably demonstrated is Ukraine's capability. The sources really emphasize this wasn't just like harassment. It was a clear demonstration. The ability to strike deep inside Russian territory, targeting high-value military assets essentially anywhere in the country.
Yes, it's a powerful signal. The sources refer to it as dealing a significant, maybe even humiliating blow to Russia, and inflicting what are described as significant losses, not just in aircraft possibly hit, but perhaps in the perception of security.
Yeah, exactly. There was even a point made by some Russian military bloggers, and this comparison really highlights the perceived impact on their side, who likened the attack to the surprise on Pearl Harbor.
Wow, that's a loaded comparison.
Absolutely. And other bloggers quickly rejected that analogy, arguing that the damage wasn't on that scale based on their initial assessments. But the very fact that the comparison was made, however briefly, tells you something about the shock, the psychological impact this strike had within certain circles in Russia.
And this wasn't some improvised strike, apparently. The alleged sophistication is a key theme in the sources. One mentions this attack was reportedly, 18 months in the making?
Think about that 18 months of planning and preparation.
Uh-huh.
The reports suggest it involved swarms of drones, launched not from conventional military sites, but from containers discreetly placed on trucks near 4 different air bases. This is a completely different operational approach.
Popping out of containers on trucks? That sounds incredibly difficult to detect beforehand.
Precisely. And a U.S. senior defense official, speaking anonymously in one source, specifically noted this level of sophistication was unprecedented in the conflict. It suggests a significant evolution in Ukraine's capabilities and their tactics.
Okay, so we've got this sophisticated long-range strike. What exactly were they targeting? The sources spend a good amount of time explaining the significance of these aircraft, and it's crucial to understanding why this attack matters so much.
Right. These aren't just any planes. They are strategic bombers, core components of Russia's nuclear triad. That means they are part of the 3-pronged system Russia maintains for nuclear deterrence alongside, intercontinental ballistic missiles and
Right, the big picture nuclear posture, the
Oh,
triad.
exactly, and nuclear submarines. But they're also highly relevant to the current conflict.
Yeah, that's key.
Very key. These bombers are actively used to launch those long-range cruise missiles that have been hitting Ukraine. So they are strategic assets in terms of global power projection and key platforms for the ongoing conventional war.
Okay, let's break down the specific aircraft types the sources say were reportedly targeted.
First up is the Tupolev Tu-95, known by NATO as the Bear. This is a beast of a plane, instantly recognizable by its 4 turboprop engines. It's an old design dating back to the 1950s, developed as a rival to the U.S. B-52 bomber.
And the B-52 is still flying, so age isn't necessarily the main factor here, I
It's
suppose.
true. Very true. The 295 has intercontinental range, meaning it can reach targets far away without refueling, and it's primarily used to carry long-range cruise missiles, up to 8 of them, which can carry either conventional or nuclear warheads. Russia was estimated to have around 60 of these before this attack.
And the critical detail the sources highlight about the 295, the really important bit.
Production of the 295 ended in 1991. This means any aircraft lost cannot be replaced, not with new ones rolling off a production line anyway. Losses are permanent dents in the total fleet size.
Okay, next on the list.
The Tupolev Tu-22M3, NATO codename Backfire. This one's from the 1970s, a twin-engine supersonic bomber. While it has a shorter range than the Tu-95, it was still considered strategic enough during the Cold War that the U.S. insisted it be included in arms control negotiations.
Huh. Interesting. What's its primary weapon?
It often carries the KH-22 cruise missile. The sources mention this missile is incredibly fast, like hitting speeds over 3 times the speed of sound. And it carries a massive warhead, nearly 1,400 pounds of explosives.
Wow.
Yeah, but however, the sources also note its guidance system is quite outdated, which can make it less accurate, particularly against ground targets. Russia had an estimated 50 to 60 of the Tu-22M3s before this strike, though some had already been lost in earlier incidents.
Like the 295, I'm guessing.
Yep, production of the Tu-22M3 also ended after 1991.
Yeah.
So similar to the Bear, losses are irreplaceable. You can see how each successful strike against these aging fleets becomes more significant over time. It really adds up.
The sources also mention a third type of critical aircraft potentially hit, not just bombers.
Yes, the A-50. This is an early warning and control aircraft. Think of it as Russia's version of the U.S. AWACS system. It's essentially a flying radar and command center used for coordinating aerial attacks, detecting targets, managing airspace, that sort of thing. Russia has very few of these in service. Very few.
So losing even 1 or 2 of those would be a major blow to their operational capability, like disproportionately so.
Absolutely. The sources really stress that any loss of an A-50 severely degrades Russia's ability to conduct complex air operations and maintain awareness of the battle space. They're incredibly high-value, low-density assets. Losing one hurts.
The sources do briefly mention the Tu-160, another strategic bomber, exists, but they focus specifically on the Tu-95s, Tu-22Ms, and A-50s as the aircraft types reportedly involved or targeted in the specific strike we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, the focus of the information you provided is clearly on the impact to these particular fleets. And the long-term implication here, as the sources highlight, is significant. Russia has lost a part of its heavy bomber fleet and key command aircraft with no immediate way to replace them. Because, like we said, production lines shut down decades ago.
It's like losing irreplaceable vintage cars, but vital military assets instead.
That's a fitting analogy, yeah. Interestingly, one expert quoted in the sources speculates that while damaging to the current fleet, these losses might ironically provide impetus. Maybe give Russia a reason to accelerate its next-generation bomber program, which is currently only in its very early development phase. Pressure creates movement, perhaps.
That's a fascinating angle, a potential silver lining, maybe, from their perspective. Okay, so we know what was targeted and why they are important. Now, where did this attack take place? This is where the reach really comes into play.
Yeah, the air bases reportedly struck were Olenya, which is situated on the Kola Peninsula, way up in the Arctic.
Way up north.
Way up north. And Belaya, located in the Irkutsk region in eastern Siberia.
Siberia, again, that's thousands of miles from Ukraine, just incredible distance.
Precisely the point the sources make.
Yeah.
And there were also reported attempts to strike bases closer to Ukraine, in western Russia, and even as far east as the Amur region, though those were apparently repelled, according to the reports.
This wasn't a random choice of location either, was it? The sources provide context here. Russia had actually taken many of these strategic bombers and moved them from bases closer to the Ukrainian border or the front lines, like Engels Air Base near the Volga River, which had been hit by earlier Ukrainian strikes.
Exactly. They relocated them to these much more distant bases like Olenya and Belaya, presumably believing the sheer distance would provide safety, make them untouchable by Ukrainian drones.
And this attack fundamentally challenged that assumption. Distance is no longer the guaranteed protection it once was, it seems.
Not at all. And that lack of guaranteed protection, combined with the damage, whatever the true number was, led to a significant reaction from Russian military bloggers. The sources describe an outcry and heavy criticism aimed squarely at the Russian Defense Ministry.
What were they saying? What was the gist?
Essentially, how did this happen again? Why haven't you learned from previous strikes? Well, there was frustration and anger that these incredibly valuable, irreplaceable assets were apparently left vulnerable, despite earlier warnings, earlier
It
attacks.
really highlights a major challenge for Russia, doesn't it? Protecting huge aircraft like these, they're just massive targets.
It's incredibly difficult, really difficult. The sources note that building hardened shelters or hangars large enough to protect strategic bombers like the 295s or 222 M3s is a daunting task.
Yeah.
Expensive, time-consuming, especially across multiple distant bases.
So they resorted to, shall we say, more immediate solutions, some quick fixes.
Yes, and this is a detail from the sources that really sticks with you, isn't it? It's quite striking. Satellite images reportedly emerged showing some 295s at various bases covered by layers of old tires.
Wait, like car tires? Seriously?
Yes, stacks of old tires piled on top of the aircraft's wings and fuselage. The sources note this measure was of dubious efficiency, which feels like an understatement, and predictably, it drew considerable mockery on social media.
Dubious efficiency.
Yeah.
Wow. And a visual that perfectly encapsulates the struggle, I guess. It really underscores the difficulty or maybe the unpreparedness in protecting these assets against drone threats they clearly underestimated, especially in terms of reach and sophistication.
It's a stark image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shows improvisation in the face of a novel and rapidly evolving threat.
So taking a step back, what does this whole picture mean for you, the listener, trying to understand the broader context of this conflict? What are the takeaways?
Well, several key things emerge from these sources. First, as we discussed, it vividly demonstrates the evolution of Ukraine's military capability, a big step up. They've shown they can project power deep into Russian territory in ways that maybe weren't thought possible earlier in the conflict.
It's a significant expansion of the battle space for sure.
Absolutely. Second, it really highlights the increasing vulnerability of even the largest, most expensive strategic military assets like these bombers to relatively inexpensive drone warfare. This is a fundamental shift, the cost-benefit analysis of military technology.
Strategic bombers are multi-million or even billion-dollar platforms, potentially threatened by drones costing, what, thousands or tens of thousands. It changes the math.
Exactly. Third, it underscores the significant challenges Russia faces, not just in protecting its aging, non-replaceable military hardware, but also in adapting its defenses quickly enough, adapting to counter-sophisticated, rapidly evolving threats like these distributed drone swarms.
It's a different kind of war than they might have prepared for, perhaps.
Precisely. And finally, this deep dive gives us crucial insight into the ongoing nature of the conflict. It's not static. Both sides are innovating, adapting, employing different tools and strategies, including reaching far behind the conventional front lines to hit key infrastructure and assets.
It really shows the depth and breadth of the struggle extends far beyond the trenches we often hear about.
Absolutely, it does.
So just to recap this deep dive for everyone, we looked at the unprecedented sophistication and surprising reach of this drone attack, striking air bases thousands of miles into Russia. We explored the critical significance of the targets Russia's strategic bombers and command aircraft, key parts of their nuclear deterrent and current strike force, and notably non-replaceable assets.
And we saw the challenges Russia faces in protecting these assets, leading to criticism from within and even resulting in, well, improvised solutions like covering multi-million-dollar bombers with old tires. Pretty remarkable.
And we touched on the conflicting claims about the exact damage, but focused on what the attack clearly demonstrated about Ukraine's evolving capability and Russia's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's a moment that really encapsulates the changing face of warfare, I think.
And that brings us to something to mull over as you think about this deep dive. A final thought. Considering the increasing sophistication, range, and, frankly, accessibility of drone technology, as demonstrated so starkly by this attack deep into Siberia, what does this kind of strike imply about the future vulnerability of other large, expensive, and seemingly secure military platforms? Think beyond just strategic bombers. What about things like major surface naval vessels, aircraft carriers, maybe? Does this kind of drone capability fundamentally change how we need to think about protecting those huge, expensive assets in the future? It gives you pause, doesn't it? Something for you to think about.